Welcome to On the Agenda, Steptoe's guide to state attorneys general and other enforcement, regulation, and compliance matters. From AI to smokestacks, consumer protection to financial services, data privacy to antitrust. Join Steptoe's seasoned litigators, counselors, and advisors as they deliver the critical insights and industry knowledge that government officials respect and that companies, nonprofits, and executives can use to navigate whatever legal challenges they face.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to On the Agenda, Steptoe's podcast focused on state attorneys general. I'm Elyse Echtman, a partner at Steptoe and the practice group leader for our government and regulatory litigation practice. I've practiced commercial litigation for more than 30 years, which has included litigation involving various state AG enforcement efforts. Today, my co-host and colleague, Michelle Kallen, and I are pleased to welcome Arizona Attorney General Kris Mayes.
Hello, General Mayes. I'm Michelle Kallen. I am also a partner at Steptoe's Government Regulatory Litigation Practice Group. And before joining Steptoe, I served in the Virginia Office of the Attorney General as Solicitor General of Virginia. Attorney General Mayes, to give background to our listeners, Attorney General Mayes has served in Arizona as Attorney General since 2023. Before her election to that role, AG Mayes was a professor at Arizona State University School of Global Sustainability. She also served as chair of the Arizona Corporation Commission, and she's held other senior roles in Arizona government. AG Mayes, welcome to the show. We'd love to begin a little bit with your background. So how has your experience on the commission working for a governor's administration and your time thus far as Attorney General shaped your approach to policy priorities as AG?
Well, that's a great question. And, I think, as an Arizona Corporation Commissioner, I served 2 terms on the Corporation Commission. And now I'm sort of coming to the close of my first term as AG here in Arizona. In Arizona, the Corporation Commission is actually considered the 4th branch of government because it is both lodged in the Constitution and elected statewide. It's considered to be one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful, public utility commission in America because of that. Many public utility commissions are actually appointed by the governor, but here it's elected statewide. So I served 2 terms there, ran statewide twice. As a Republican, now I am a Democrat, as you know. So I think I'm the only person in Arizona history to serve in 2 different statewide elected offices in 2 different political parties. So it's kind of interesting. At the commission, as also Attorney General, I made protecting consumers a priority. And obviously, at the Corporation Commission, it was largely about regulating the state's largest utilities. So, trying to protect consumers against unreasonable rate increases by electric utilities, gas utilities, water utilities. We also regulated pipeline safety, railroad safety, and prosecuted civil securities fraud. So it kind of felt like a natural idea to run for Attorney General because a lot of this job, as you guys know, is about standing in the breach on behalf of consumers and also prosecuting a number of significant portion of the criminal code here in Arizona. So we do securities fraud on the criminal side, but we also do about 80% of the big drug investigations and drug prosecutions in Arizona. And I work with federal agencies like the DEA, the FBI, and ATF, and others to really go after the Mexican drug cartels and try to keep them in check. Many people don't know this, but over the last 3 years, more than 50% of all the fentanyl that was seized in the United States was seized here in Arizona. So we are very much the fentanyl funnel for the rest of the country, and we are doing everything we can to prosecute these cartels to keep these drugs out of our country. And we frankly need more help from the federal government. We're really not getting it from the Trump administration, unfortunately.
So, when running for Attorney General, you described yourself as an independent watchdog for the people of Arizona. And how has that shaped the priorities you've had? I mean, fentanyl, that's a super important priority, and we all understand what a big issue that is. What other priorities has that shaped for you in your role?
Yeah, so I mean, I really ran for this office primarily because I was very interested in what we could do with it to protect people, especially against scams, against corporate consolidation that I think is getting out of hand in this country. I wanted to revive antitrust law in Arizona. It was kind of moribund. My predecessors had not really taken antitrust law seriously and hadn't made it a priority. So, for instance, as you know, we were one of the states that sued along with the FTC to block the proposed Kroger Albertsons merger, which would have combined out here in Arizona Fry's and Safeway and Smith's into one giant mega grocery operation, which I thought would have increased prices at a time when people can't afford it. We've also sued a company called RealPage and 9 major landlords for engaging in what we deem to be illegal collusion that has raised rent in Arizona or contributed to the increase in rent in this state. Rent has increased in Arizona by 75%, more than 75% since 2016. And I think that collusion has been a part of it between those companies. We also have really gone after companies that are engaging and long-term care facilities that are engaging in elder abuse and have been cracking down on elder abuse and elder scams. So that's both on the physical elder abuse side and the consumer or the financial elder abuse side, and have really done a number of things, including in one case, we felt the need to take a long-term care facility out of the ownership group and put it into receivership. That had never been done in the state of Arizona before. We also started to crack down on the use of secrecy clauses by long-term care facilities and their corporate owners. They were putting into arbitration agreements that people had to sign when their loved ones were going into nursing homes. They had to sign a secrecy agreement that made them promise to never tell me when they were suing the long-term care facility over abuse. And so you can imagine, it's just hard to imagine corporations getting people to sign these agreements that said you're never allowed to tell law enforcement, especially the attorney general, if you sue us. And the problem with that is, then you can't tell where the trends are. You can't tell where the problems are. It's harder for me to then enforce the law against the really, really bad actors. I mean, there's a lot of really good actors in this space, but there's some bad apples. And that's my job, is to go after the bad apples and in all these different areas that an AG handles.
So have you had any of those clauses invalidated as against public
Yes.
policy?
Yes, we did. Yeah. And the goal was to have at least one invalidated. And then the industry says, oh, okay, I don't want to be sued by Kris Mayes. So we're not gonna, we're going to take those out of the contracts. That's where we wanted to be, right? That's where we wanted to land with that.
Is that part of your kind of approach to enforcement too, thinking through prioritizing where to put litigation efforts to set a standard? I'd be fascinated to hear more about how that plays into your broader enforcement strategy.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as both of you know, some AG offices are bigger than others. So I don't know how big Virginia is in terms of the office, but we have about 1,000 total employees. Maybe, so it's probably mid-sized AG's office. It's not New York, it's not California, it's not Washington State, which have very large AG offices, but it's still one of the largest law firms essentially in the state of Arizona, the largest public law firm in the state of Arizona. And so, yeah, I have to think about where we put our resources and where we assign lawyers to. And I mean, I think that's one of the biggest jobs of any attorney general because, I can't do all the cases myself. That would be crazy, but I can set the agenda and I can move resources around. And then I can say, okay, we're going to put a focus on protecting our elderly, or we're going to put a focus on protecting our water supplies. And we're going to do this case that we hope will send a signal to an industry that that thing that they're doing, and in many cases, they're not alone in doing that thing, is no longer going to be acceptable, or at least we're certainly not going to turn a blind eye to it in the state of Arizona. And I think that's been my approach to a lot of these things. What's another good example of that? We started cracking down on things like illegal sales of vapes to kids by smoke shops here in Arizona. And so we took enforcement action against these vaping shops that were clearly selling to children and teenagers, and started cracking down on the sale of something called kratom that was being done in an illegal way. So yeah, that's certainly something that we do, which is we try to highlight these cases, try to identify the areas where we can make the most impact as a law enforcement agency and in terms of our civil division.
And it's fascinating because each AG's office is structured differently. So in Virginia, for example, the initial prosecution and kind of litigation decisions are made by local prosecutors, but then appeals bubble up to the AG's office. So I guess in that vein, with each AG's office being structured a little differently, how is your office generally structured? Do you represent all agencies in the state? Do you do all the work in-house, or do you use outside counsel for some matters?
Yeah, so here in Arizona, we represent most state agencies. There's a list of about 8 or so state agencies that were carved out for different reasons from the AG's representation. But basically, we have a whole state government division, we call it SGD, that represents the state agencies. And then we have a civil division, which is where a lot of that work we were just talking about happens. We file lawsuits on behalf of the people of Arizona against corporate actors that are violating what we call the Arizona Consumer Fraud Act, ACFA. And most states have a version of that. And then inside that civil division also is our antitrust unit, where we enforce state antitrust law. And then we have a criminal division that does those big drug cases I was talking about earlier. We also do major fraud cases, public corruption cases out of that division. And then we have also a section that's also within the civil division that does nicotine and tobacco enforcement. So we have a group of, I think it's almost 100 teenagers who join with our investigators to do sting operations on smoke shops and other entities like gas stations that are selling tobacco illegally to kids. And we're using the money from the tobacco settlement way back when, right? I think now 20 years ago, that set up that funding that allows us to do those sting operations where kids volunteer, well, not kids, I guess teenagers, you have to be a certain age, volunteer to go out with our special agents and check to see whether these smoke shops are illegally selling cigarettes and vapes to children.
So is that their community service to act as secret shoppers?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, and they get to put it on their resume, and it's kind of a cool thing, I think, to be able to put on your resume as you're applying for college. I think we call it our tobacco strike force. And then we do have 60 special agents that work in the criminal division. Those are our investigators. They are law enforcement agents, they're LEOs. They go out and do undercover operations, whether it's on drug cases or major fraud cases. And there are about 60 of them. Many of them are former police officers who sort of came over after retiring from the police department, various police departments in Arizona, and they help us investigate the criminal cases, and a few of them are helping to investigate our civil cases. But you also asked about outside counsel. Some state agencies do hire outside counsel. There's like sometimes an issue will come up that's really specialized and they need some outside counsel help. So they'll go out and hire a firm like yours or another firm and say, hey, can you help us handle this particular issue? We've never seen this before. And then we also use outside counsel occasionally in other circumstances. So yeah, it certainly happens. And it's a way, I personally view it as a way for us to use the private sector as a force multiplier for what we're doing here at the AG's office. And it's especially important in an era when our legislature isn't always that supportive of our office. Right now, I don't have a legislature that is funding my office adequately, either on the criminal side or on the civil side or in our state government division. And that's when we have to reach out and be creative and try to use the private sector to fill in gaps.
So, with the change in federal administration from Biden to Trump, has that changed the way that you do your job and set your priorities? And I think you probably have a unique perspective on this, being a former Republican who's now a Democrat.
Yeah. In some ways it has, and we can talk about the federal litigation that I've joined with other Democratic AGs in. In some ways it hasn't. That issue that I talked about earlier on with regard to the DEA. So, because we're here on the border, we need the federal government, and especially the DEA, to be sending more agents to Arizona to help me with these cases, because I work with the DEA to investigate drug cases, to investigate the cartels. Whether it was the Biden administration or now the Trump administration, they have still never sent us the number of DEA agents that we need. Neither administration did. And I went to the White House under the Biden administration and said, you need to send us more DEA agents. Recently, I wrote Pam Bondi a letter and said, Dear Pam, please send me an additional 60 DEA agents. And not only did she not send me those 60 DEA agents, she also took 60 out of Arizona to do interior immigration enforcement and, chase around after landscapers and gardeners, which is not what we need. That is not making our state more safe, I don't think, anyway. So in that sense, those issues have spanned multiple administrations. In the way that it has, things have changed now in terms of the federal government's interest in enforcing antitrust. I don't think the Trump administration is very interested in antitrust enforcement, which is kind of sad. And it's left the states and state AGs in the position of having to step into that gap in the breach and do that. And I think that's what you're seeing in the Live Nation case. That's what you're seeing in the Nexstar Tegna proposed merger. Not a good merger, really bad merger for this country. I think it's terrible. I think that there's a gold rush right now on to try to merge, and that's going to be bad for consumers. It almost always is. Sometimes it's not, but almost always it is. And so I would say that has changed. And then, of course, we've had to fight back against federal overreach under this administration. I've now sued the federal government 38 times, along with my fellow Democratic AGs. Every time the president or Doge or whoever violates the Constitution or harms our states, we feel the need to step up and file those lawsuits. So those 38 lawsuits, which had to do with the federal government trying to defund AmeriCorps, Head Start, Meals on Wheels. They even tried to defund our drug interdiction efforts, which was crazy. That was early on. They tried to defund our university system. They tried to mess with the NIH funding formula, all of which was illegal because it violated the separation of powers. And then, of course, there's the tariffs case, which I have been co-leading with Dan Rayfield, the AG of Oregon. And we were successful, as you both know, at the United States Supreme Court in beating back the tariffs under IEEPA. And now the federal government has reapplied tariffs under Section 122. And we are now back in front of the Court of International Trade, this time with 22 states, including several governors, fighting those tariffs. And so, yeah, that has been a big change, and it started a little over a year ago.
Can you tell us a little bit more about how you engage with other states on these efforts? Presumably, probably some of the ones against the federal government are more blue heavy, I would assume. But I also assume the antitrust ones, for example, are probably both red and blue states. So we'd love to learn a little bit more about your engagement on these multi-state efforts.
Yeah, and I love it every time we get a chance to do one of these multi-state efforts, and it can be bipartisan. It's great. There are still efforts. Live Nation is a good example of one that has Republican and Democratic support. And I personally believe that a number of Republican AGs would desperately love to join us on some of the federal overreach litigation, including the tariffs, because as a former Republican, I can tell you no Republican really believes in tariffs. So, this is not a thing that a Democrat now, but that Republicans used to believe in ever. In fact, free trade is sort of fundamental to the Republican Party, or I thought it was. I know that there are Republican AGs who would love to join us, but they don't feel like they can, given who occupies the White House right now. But we are getting support from red states. And let me tell you how that is. So we have had the governor of Kentucky join us, Andy Beshear. His Republican AG did not want to on, I think, the tariffs, maybe a couple of other cases. And then the governor of Pennsylvania, which also has a Republican AG, Josh Shapiro, has joined us on multiple of these cases. His AG, I think Dave Sunday, is a Republican and would not join us. So we have Republican states, and my own state is very evenly divided. Arizona is about a third Democratic, a third Republican, and a third independent. And we are in these because I think it's important not to have our states get hurt. Those 38 lawsuits, and by the way, I do not wake up every morning wanting to sue the federal government. That former Republican in me still believes in states' rights and still believes in the 10th Amendment and the 9th Amendment. And I also feel like I have to protect my residents. I mean, those 38 lawsuits, because we were able to stop all those things that I talked about, AmeriCorps cuts, all that university funding, that's $1.5 billion that we would have lost if I had not won my race for AG by 280 votes, by the way, the closest statewide race in Arizona history, out of 2.5 million. So if I wasn't here to join the state of Arizona as their AG into those lawsuits, we would have lost $1.5 billion. And so that's the true irony of the situation, which is it's the Republican states that are getting hammered by this administration because their AG is not entering them into these lawsuits. And as you know, the Supreme Court in the birthright citizenship case, when it kicked the case back to the lower courts, and it's going back to the Supreme Court, but in that decision kicking it back, they disfavored nationwide injunctions, which is what ironically has led to this situation where if you're not part of the lawsuit, then you're out of luck.
Right. You're not getting the benefit of any win.
Right. You don't get the benefit of any win. And so that just sets up a situation where AG races became even more important than they ever were.
And so are you involved in NAG or DAGA, any of those attorney general associations? And how do you find that enhances your ability to do your job?
So NAG is a great organization in a couple ways. Number one, it's bipartisan. And it's a way to bring Republican and Democratic AGs together in a way that is more sort of policy focused and not politically focused. And so we find that it's helpful, especially for our staff, to go to those meetings. They put on seminars. It's a way for staff to compare notes. We just had a meeting of NAG, I think it was civil division leaders here in Scottsdale recently. So NAG's really important, and it's an important way for different states to get together. DAGA is great in the sense that it has been a great way for us to get together, those of us who are fighting the federal overreach, to get together and to plan and strategize and to meet. We meet together. The Democratic AGs actually meet together on a Zoom like this one every other day, all 24 of us.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is much more frequent than I would have expected.
Yeah, I get that reaction a lot. And we do that because we know how important it is. I mean, most of us believe this may be the most important job and the most important time we will ever serve in our entire lives. And I often get this question from reporters, Kris, don't you think you're suing Donald Trump too much? He did win Arizona in 2024, and aren't you worried about your reelection, et cetera? And I always say, look, I'm a 54-year-old woman, and if all I ever do with the rest of my life is spend the next year defending our democracy and standing up for the rule of law, then I'll be okay with that. And I think that's the way most of Democratic AGs are feeling right now, which is we are never, ever going to do anything more important than this job right now in this moment in time in our nation's history.
And it's interesting to see also as things shift at a federal level, states are really stepping in to fill gaps that used to be filled more at a federal level. Are there particular areas that stand out to you where you feel like you're playing a key role to fill in a gap at a federal level, or other of the AGs with whom you speak regularly that they're working to fill those gaps?
I think there's probably way more than this, but there's two that pop into my mind immediately. One is obviously the antitrust space, and we talked about that. The other, and we'll see how that plays out. The problem with the federal government, both the FTC, the CFPB, and the Department of Justice stepping away from antitrust litigation and enforcement, is that they bring a lot of firepower to these cases. And normally, states, they have a lot of resources, they have a lot of analytical capacity, they have the ability to hire economists. All of the work the back engine work that's necessary to do an antitrust case, which are complicated and not easy cases to bring, right? Oftentimes that came from the FTC or that came from the DOJ. And so it's highly problematic for the federal government to be backing away from these cases, which are really important for protecting consumers. We are definitely going to be stretched as states to bring to the table the resources to do these cases that the federal government normally would be helping us with, because we would sort of all come together on a case and caboose onto a case. The other area is sort of environmental protection. The EPA is stepping away from a lot right now. I'm sure you saw what just has happened with the endangerment finding. We are suing the federal government over their decision to try to drop the endangerment finding and do a new rulemaking on that. So I think, again, the EPA, the Department of Energy, FERC, these are all incredibly important agencies that do very important work and are being told to back off of a lot of environmental protection. And so that leaves states in the position of trying to do all the work. And the smaller states, it's just almost impossible. It's very, very hard. States like California and New York have huge environmental sections inside their AG's office where they can continue to do work. Their legislatures will continue to do rulemakings that are important. And states like mine will do everything we can. I have an environmental protection unit that I stood up here at the AG's office for the first time, I think, in 20 years, that is doing a lot of work, including intervening in utility rate cases to oppose large rate increases that are going on out here related to data centers.
Yeah. So you've noted that water security is an important issue in Arizona. Can you tell us a little bit about your efforts on that topic?
Yeah, so we are in the midst of an epic drought here in the Southwest. We are headed into a crisis situation with the Colorado River, which is our lifeline in Arizona. It is how many of our major cities get a significant portion of their water. We have not upgraded our groundwater laws also since, I think, 1980. And so I have been taking actions against large corporations, including one owned by the Saudi government, essentially, in Western Arizona, where the state had been allowing this Saudi owned corporation called Fondamonte to grow alfalfa in the desert and suck an enormous amount of water out of the ground, such that they were dewatering their surrounding neighbors' wells. They had sunk the ground literally by, I think, a foot. People's homes were being cracked. Literally, cracks were appearing in homes because of this huge suck of water by the Saudis. So we sued them under nuisance law and used nuisance law in another part of our state down in southeastern Arizona and got a company called Riverview Dairy, which is a major corporation that does business in other parts of the country, to start using less water and to put up money to help their neighbors re-drill their wells. And people have said, well, boy, Kris, nobody's ever used nuisance law in that way. And my answer is, well, we have a nuisance law and we have a problem. So, yeah, yes, that's true. We haven't used it in that way, but we also haven't been in an epic drought and haven't seen the consequences yet until now of allowing a huge corporations to withdraw enormous amounts of water in a way that deprives people of their quiet use and enjoyment of their homes and really is destroying the value of their homes. So we've gotten really active in that space. We'll continue to do that, but we also are going to be watching closely what's happening with the situation on the Colorado River. Most of that is being litigated, or, well, if we have to go to litigation, hopefully we don't, but that would be litigated probably by the Arizona Department of Water Resources. We have a lower basin state versus upper basin state situation developing, and a river that is in real distress. And one of the big issues related to that, for those of you who are listening to this who kind of understand or have been down to this area, the river, the Colorado River, and then the lakes that pool up near the dams above Arizona, including Hoover, that water is declining so precipitously that we're facing a situation where we may not be able to produce electricity, hydroelectricity from the dams, because the water could go below the intake valves for these massively important dams that provide electricity to much of the West. And so there are huge consequences both on water supply to southwestern states like Arizona and California, but also something that I think very few people are thinking about, which is what happens to the Western grid when that very cheap and clean source of electricity is no longer available to us. And I certainly hope it's something that FERC and power authorities throughout the West are thinking about, and that the Bureau of Reclamation and the Department of Interior are thinking about, because they cannot allow that to happen.
Is that a place, I mean, coming from the energy world, and we at our firm do quite a bit of energy work, the sort of thinking creatively about sources of generation, is that a place where you work collaboratively with utilities? I'd be curious to learn more about your relationship with utilities, both specifically there and generally.
It's an interesting relationship with the utilities, let's put it that way, because I know them very well and I know how they operate. Probably know how they operate better than any other AG in the history of the state, because I've been both a corporation commissioner and now AG, and there just aren't that many AGs who are former public service commissioners, right? Public utility commissioners. But it's a really important time in our state's history for us to have that expertise and focus in this office. And yes, we also have something here in Arizona, and I don't know if other states do it this way, but we have something called Arizona Power Plant and Line Siting Committee, which is actually chaired by my office. So my designee chairs this committee, which also includes state agency heads, et cetera, and members of the public, that makes the initial decision about where power plants are sited and transmission lines are sited. And so that kind of helps to determine what kind of mix of energy we have. Is it natural gas? We're not doing any additional coal. But is it solar? Is it wind? Is it natural gas? Is it geothermal, which, believe it or not, we do have in Arizona and in Southern California? As a corporation commissioner, I was the co-author of Arizona's renewable energy standard and our energy efficiency standards. We need energy. We are still one of the fastest growing states in the country, despite our water supply issues, which is sort of a potential collision coming between those two things, where we have so many people moving to Arizona because it's a great place to live, it's a great place to do business, and yet natural resources, climate change are pushing against that. So Mother Nature is saying, "Hey Arizona, pay attention to me, pay attention to your environment and to the climate, because what you're doing right now is not working."
So you mentioned data centers earlier, and there's been a lot of focus on data centers, especially with the expansion of AI. And, what kind of stress do they put on the electrical grid? And are consumers being saddled with the bills for some of the energy that they're consuming? Has your office had any involvement in that area?
Yeah, in a couple of ways. And let me say from the outset, I'm not blanketly opposed to data centers, and what I do think is they need to go in appropriate places that have water and power. We have not enough of either of those here in Arizona, and they need to pay for themselves. And that is not what is happening, at least in Arizona. And I think there are some other state AGs like Dana Nessel in Michigan who are also beginning to focus on this issue. Actually, she has been focused on it just as long as, if not longer than me. And I think there are a way to structure rates in rate cases, and that PUCs can structure rates where we require data centers to pay for themselves, and where we require for them to come up with the water supplies necessary to power the data centers. We intervened in front of the Tucson Electric Power Company rate case at the Corporation Commission to try to accomplish those things and to push back against the rate increases. Both these utilities are asking for 15% rate increases after having already gotten 2 consecutive rate increases over the past 5 years. This would be the third rate increase for each of them. This is part of our affordability problem out here in Arizona, and I will tell you that the vast majority of Arizonans do not think that they should be subsidizing the cost of data centers for billionaires. And so this is not only an important resource issue, but it's a very, very potent political issue.
And it's interesting. It also plays into the idea from data centers that are getting powered to empower AI. AI is a fascinating place where both the idea that you spoke about of applying kind of older laws to new areas and here new technology, that's a major thing that's going on. And then also you have multi-state efforts when it comes to AI. So we'd love to hear your thoughts on whether AI is a priority for you and how you're going about facing, beyond data centers, the evolution of AI technology.
Yeah, a couple ways you're going to see AGs get active in this space. Number one is dealing with them in the context of rate cases and protecting consumers financially. The other is, trying to get ahead of AI has the potential to do extraordinary things in medicine. Just that unto itself. The ability, I think AI will solve lethal, deadly diseases in a way that we can't even imagine at this point. So there is a place for AI. The problem is that there are all these other downsides to AI, right? Job destruction, power, raising rates, utility rates, depleting water supplies. And then there's another dark side to AI that AGs are going to increasingly get involved with, which is their allowance of things like chat bots that are talking children into committing suicide or sexualizing images of children. And that's something that we're going to start looking at here in this office. And we actually have one case underway. And you're going to see an increasing number of prosecutions against people who are using AI in the course of CSAM, which is computer generated sexual materials. And the AI companies need to get their hands around that, because they're gonna start to see aggressive actions by AGs if they don't get a handle of it soon.
On the federal state dynamic, again, do you have any advice for companies that may be operating nationally on how they navigate potential conflicts between Arizona's enforcement efforts and federal policies?
Oh gosh. Well, that's kind of always been an issue, right? That's always probably been a tough one for corporations. And they've got 50 different states, right? Especially large corporations that are operating in 50 different states. And then every once in a while, and this is definitely one of those times, when you have a federal government that is wildly different from half the country and kind of on the same page with the other half of the country, sort of. Although I would argue if you gave truth serum to some of those Republican AGs, they would not agree with some of what's going on at the federal level. So I guess my advice is, you're going to have to beef up your compliance efforts. You're going to have to be focused on states. You can't ignore the states because, state AGs and governors are not going anywhere. And so you're just going to be dealing with a more complex situation where you have federal priorities over here. You're going to have to deal with those. But just remember that this administration won't be there forever. And don't ignore the states at your peril, because the states will still be there after this administration is gone.
And what's your approach towards companies who are trying to figure out how to navigate your priorities in Arizona? Are you open to having dialogues?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I always prefer to have companies come in and talk to me. Always did when I was on the Public Utility Commission here, about what they're doing, give them a sense of what my priorities are. If there's a way, for us to resolve something without a lawsuit, that often can be a win. Lawsuits can drag on. They can go on for years and years, especially multi-state lawsuits. To be totally candid with you, though I have been a part of many of them, I am frustrated by how long they can go on. I gave you that example of the company Riverview Dairy that came to the table with us before I had to sue them under nuisance law, and came up with a solution that actually they ended up being very happy with, in terms of their ability to say to this community, we are affirmatively doing these things because we want to be known as a good community partner. And so I think that companies need to not see those kinds of settlements as a weakness. And so it's interesting to me, sometimes you see companies that come with sort of this, I'm going to brawl it out with you attitude, and they think the AGs are all about brawling it out and, suing no matter what. That's not necessarily the case. I mean, many of us are solutions oriented. I want to get something done for my state. And sometimes you do that by working with companies. When I was on the Corporation Commission, some of my biggest accomplishments were done in conjunction with the utilities. I mean, we jointly crafted and they then implemented the renewable energy standard and the net metering laws that made Arizona one of the biggest states in the country for rooftop solar energy. And that then created a huge ecosystem of solar companies here in Arizona. These are all things that you can get done by working together, both government and private industry.
Well, that's very helpful and aligns with the advice that we give our clients when they come to us on state AG matters. So it's nice to see that symbiosis there.
Yeah.
I guess as we close out here, looking ahead over the next few years, what are your top priorities that you see on the horizon?
Wow. I want to continue to fight for consumers in the state of Arizona. I want to make sure that we still have true competition in our country and in the state of Arizona. I think companies have gotten too large and too powerful at their own peril to some degree. And so we need to get back to a situation where we still believe in competition. in this country that I think always, again, this is probably a former Republican in me speaking, that always redounds to the benefit of consumers. I want to make sure that we are protecting our environment and fighting climate change and protecting ratepayers. I want to make sure that we're protecting our most vulnerable in our society. I want to make sure that we have the resources we need from the federal government to help us fight the Mexican drug cartel so that those drugs don't end up in the interior of the country. And I want us to get back to a situation in which the federal government supports the separation of powers and the Constitution. And I really believe that every time we file one of these lawsuits against the federal government, I think about what past generations of Americans who fought and died and sacrificed for this flag behind me and for this country and for our democracy. And I really believe that they are speaking to us across the ages. And they're telling all of us, fight for your country, fight for that Constitution, because we did. So that's what I'll be thinking about for as long as I'm sitting in this chair.
Great to talk to you today. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, guys. It's great to talk to you. Great conversation.
Thanks for listening to On the Agenda from Steptoe. Subscribe in your favorite podcast app so you don't miss future episodes. To learn more about Steptoe, visit steptoe.com. When the stakes are high, experience matters.